Ladies and gentlemen, our guests have arrived. I, 𝗧𝗵𝗲
And I, Kavya,
executive members of Kartavya, the Civil Services Society of Kirori College, extend a warm welcome to one and all present here to today's invaluable and exciting panel discussion on the topic Kartavya-Kaal, navigating amidst fiscal challenges and geopolitical realities.
now without any further delay, I would like to hand over the mic to our first guest, Shri 𝗵𝗵𝗶 sir. Please, sir.
Okay. What time is it? Yeah, it's become afternoon. Respected professors and dear students, a very good afternoon to all of you. I've looked at what was sent to me, but I will ramble a little bit because I think you don't really want a lecture on some topic in economics, whether it is micro, macro, trade related, etc. I've jotted down a few points just to jog my memory of what we want to discuss today. You notice I use the word discuss rather than a lecture because please stop me anytime if you have a doubt about something I'm saying. I don't know whether we have time for a question and answer session, but even while I'm speaking, if you raise your hand, I will recognize you and then try to respond to whatever query you might have. I would like to suggest that, you don't understand the present if you don't study a little bit about the past. We talk a lot about our ancient civilization, and we were reminded about our ancient wisdom in terms of our kartavya, our accountabilities, our multiple accountabilities at the level of a family, society, country, world as a whole. But while we are an ancient civilization, what is often forgotten is that we are a very, very young nation. We are much younger than the United States or the UK or Germany or many such countries. We are only born in 1947. And it is not just the invasions from the West. There were many, many influences on our country. So as long as we are firmly with our feet planted on the ground and recognize that we are a young nation, you're all very young, much younger than me, but even as you navigate through your lives, whether in the college now or later on in your working lives, please remember that we are a very, very fragile, in many ways, union of states. In the past, if you look back, you will see many examples of, if you go back to King Ashok fighting with Kaling, you think of many, many kingdoms in the south extending their influence towards the east. And if you go to Bali or if you go to Indonesia proper, not the island Bali, but the island on which Jakarta is, you'll see a lot of Hindu influence. So while our influence, social and otherwise, extended both to the west and to the east, for instance, somewhere around the time of the Roman Empire, 2nd or 3rd century AD, discussions in the Roman Senate, all this is recorded, so you can look it up. Maybe Google will give it to you, but maybe you have to do some more detailed research. You will find that discussions in the Roman Senate included worry about the fact that too much gold was going to India. Because whether it is, it's not just spices, because spices are really not gain currency, it is actually fine fabrics. So the Romans, who had a very large empire of their own, were worried about a lot of their wealth flowing east to India. But it was more to Cochin and places on our west coast, which, as you know, depending on the time of the year, the winds blow from west to east or east to west. When winds blow from west to east, then sailboats can come from the west to India. I would strongly urge that, as I already said it once, that read about our ancient history because it is different for different parts of the country. People from on our west coast did go as far as the countries in which we have populations which are called Arab. But there were many voyages to the east, and who did it and how and where. So that gives you a sense of who we are. Perhaps I'm speaking to you in English because I grew up in a school which was English medium, college which was English medium, Delhi University, all the papers were in English. You could not in my time appear for papers in any vernacular language. Now perhaps you can, which is very good. But at the same time, unfortunately, I think it is still true that most textbooks are not available in all vernacular languages. You will have to perforce know some English. There's no harm in knowing some English because it gives you a window to people outside the country. So you know your own language and you also know some English. Now you'll be wondering, what has all this got to do with the Indian economy? It has a lot to do with the Indian economy because unless there is a very stable Indian Union, there is no Indian economy. And, there is some talk about India and Bharat. And I don't see any contradiction. The Constitution does not see any contradiction. The Constitution, in one of its early lines, says, Bharat, that is India. And India is not a Western word, by the way. India is actually derived from the river Indus. So, both are very deeply rooted. Bharat, depending upon when I was growing up, I was told that Bharat is the first king, whether he was the first king or not, and all other kings were his children and grandchildren and so on and so forth. So therefore Bharat, because he ruled over, but obviously he could not have ruled over today's modern India. And when I was ambassador in the to the European Union, they would tell me with great pride that Europe is a part of the world where they have so many languages and yet they have been able to shape a union and have a customs union. The UK, I think, what I would think is in a very silly move, has left the European Union with whom they have the maximum amount of trade and investment. But I would gently point out, they'll say we have 28 members, now they are down to 27 because UK has left. I would gently point out to them because they would say we have so many languages. How many scripts do you have? 3, 4. I said you have 4 scripts. And you know what those 4 scripts are, Cyrillic, Euskadi, the Roman and Greek. I said, just look at any of your, I don't know, I'm not going to ask you and put you on the spot as to how many scripts we have. Take any Indian currency note, you flip it, you'll see 14 scripts there. So once I told them that we have 14 scripts, they said, my God, how are you one country? You have 14 scripts. While there are many dialects and many versions of Chinese in China, but they have just one script. So the written form is the same. So I'm going on harping on all this to point out, I'm sure in this group of students there are people with different mother tongues. So we respect each other for our mother tongues. We talk to each other in Hindi or English as the case may be. But without that kind of cohesion, which I worry about sometimes, whether we have that or not, sometimes it appears we have it in a very, very resounding, confidence-inspiring way, and sometimes I feel we don't. And particularly when I hear of differences between people, we've had invaders coming in from the West. People from the East have also tried to invade us, as the Japanese did. As you know, they came from the East, and there was that famous battle in Kohima, I don't know how many of you have gone to the capital of Nagaland. I would urge everybody, I know it's expensive, but when you are students, you are prepared to take some discomfort which you find difficult later on. Try and travel. Kohima, on a tennis court, there was a famous battle between the Japanese forces and the British forces, which are basically all Indian. I mean, the Jawans who died were all Indian. So the point here is that be aware of the possibility of physical aggression, be aware of social and other elements which may divide people in our country rather than unify them. Once you are familiar with that, then you don't get trapped into taking one narrow-minded line on something or the other. I will not speak for long because I would like to invite questions. By the way, how long am I supposed to speak?
You may continue for 10 minutes.
Okay, good. So then I will include questions in the 10-15 minutes. You see, we talk about our economy growing and what it is going to be in 2030, 2040. I would submit to all of you, do not look at where the economy will be in 10 years or even 5 years. Let's focus on a 3-year horizon. That's a better way of looking for me. I find that the uncertainties are so huge that any projections beyond 3 to 4 years becomes more a matter of speculation. You say, oh, come on, you can still project. Think of 2019 and what happened in 2020, which was COVID. Now, there's no way that you know in 2019 that by March 24th it was when the Prime Minister declared a national lockdown in terms of, there's no way anybody could have predicted that in March of 2019. So the point I'm trying to make and emphasize here is that for economists to make projections more than 3 years, they're doing the safe thing, which is I'll be out of this job, whatever job I'm doing, even if I'm proved wrong, who cares? So be aware of I won't say beware, I don't say beware is too strong a word, but be a little wary of people who make projections of where India's economy will be in 2030 and 2040 and so on. What we need to do is over the next 3 years, what can we do to make it stronger and to grow faster? One aspect of the Indian economy that I'm particularly sad about is our inability to export goods to the extent it could and should have by now. I don't know, you should look up the trade figures. My recollection is that we've had an adverse balance of trade in goods since 1970, except, funnily enough, for the emergency year of 1976. But the volumes are very low. So that kind of little bit of goods trade surplus is neither here nor there. So it is to the credit of the people at the helm in 1991 who decided to do away with industrial licensing. I won't go into the history of how and when MRTP came and what happened and so on. Just to give you a sense, be careful when you say GST came when Mr. Arun Jaitley was finance minister. But LK Jha was looking at reform of indirect taxes in 1970. Everything, be very careful. Go back, look, don't accept some PhD in economics who happens to be in some very senior position just because they say something. Go and do your own fact-checking. So I am sad, literally sad, that a country which exported so much that the Roman Senate is discussing we are getting too many imports. It was not software. It was not export of services. It was export of goods. That all the Roman gold is coming to India. That we now for the last, almost 50 years have an adverse balance of trade in goods. There are multiple reasons for it. This is not the time and place to discuss that. But one major factor, according to me, is this misplaced idea about the strength of the rupee. Somehow the strength of an economy, You see, if you have higher inflation, for those of you who are economic students, you know very well, if you have higher inflation, unless your total factor productivity is very high, your currency should depreciate. It's very straightforward. It is called Fisher theorem. So if you don't have that depreciation of your currency as distinct from devaluation. In 1991, as you know, in two stages, the then people in government engineered a devaluation of the rupee. It's like water collecting behind a dam. If you allow it to collect, at some point of time, it will go over the dam. And so that's what happened in terms of the devaluation. So let's not do that. And now I'm going to shock you. You'll say, my God, I was planning to go abroad to study and it's going to become very expensive for me. I personally feel, my calculations are, the rupee should be now adjusted for total factor productivity somewhere around 102 to the dollar, not at 82. So Reserve Bank of India keeps intervening. And you know what's going to happen? The IMF is going to accuse us of currency manipulation, because that's what the Chinese did for 30, 40 years. That's how they managed to make their goods competitive. I'm not saying this is some kind of a panacea, that just because you allow the exchange rate to find its, what I would consider an appropriately competitive level, that suddenly your goods, you will say, but what about inflation? Because RBI will keep selling dollars. And to that extent, the country will be awash with rupee liquidity. The way to handle that is, RBI cannot issue bonds. It's not allowed to issue bonds. The Government of India can. So the Government of India can, I'm suddenly kind of dipping into something technical, but Government of India can issue bonds which are held to maturity, and which the Government of India agrees with RBI behind the scenes to do this in sufficient volume that you don't have inflation and yet the rupee is allowed to float downwards. As I said, just for your information, as you know, we are not supposed to manipulate our currency, but come on, you know, the US in 1970 went off the gold standard. In 1985, Plaza Accord, as you know, the US manipulated its currency downwards by asking, at that time, Japan, Germany, and so on. The EU was not there in the form that it is today. There was still the Deutsche Mark in 1985, and still the French franc and the Japanese yen, and the US dollar was effectively devalued. Why Plaza Accord? There's a hotel called Hotel Plaza in New York. That's where the meeting took place. But all this to say that we have a long way to go, and I just took one little element of the economy, which is trade, and within trade, goods trade. We are doing stupendously well in services. There was a time when services constituted a small fraction of our total exports. I don't know, maybe some of you might know the exact number, but I think it's going over 200 billion this year. Our goods exports are still somewhere around 300 and something. So we are also import services. Maybe you know that, maybe you don't. So a country's real strength in terms of its economy becomes more apparent when it doesn't have to have a trade surplus. Maybe at our stage of development, we can have a small current account deficit, but we should not perennially have a deficit in goods trade, because goods, production of goods means it has to be a factory or some other large a production unit which gives it a low cost of production per unit, and then we have more employment. As we all know, in India, there is no unemployment. You'll say, my God, what are you talking about? Look at these numbers from the Center for Monitoring of the Indian Economy, the CMIE, which is headquartered. It's owned by a good friend. I'm not advertising it, but I think 𝗂𝗑 uses their numbers at times, and so does the think tank. I used to be with 𝗂𝗑, now I'm with another think tank. Why do I say there is no unemployment? There can't be unemployment. There is underemployment. There are various degrees of, if you are completely unemployed, you are dead. I mean, you have no income. I'm talking about somebody who is right at the bottom of the economic ladder. I've seen people in my hometown in Tejpur, Assam, even just a month back I was there, less than a month back. People pulling carts, no shoes or slippers on their feet. They're just moving some goods, 20 fans from this go down to the shop. So that person will be obviously counted as unemployed because he has no fixed employment. Somebody says, उधर जाइए वहाँ से वो 40 फैन लेके आई, वो कैसे लाओ, वो ठेला वो वाला सुभाष देगा आपको ठेला और मेरे पास आके ले आइए आप. So this person is underemployed. He is not unemployed. And similarly, everybody who has very low income is usually underemployed. We just need to move them from this, what I would call the informal economy, to the formal part of the economy, start working for a company, whether it is in production or whatever it is. And for that, that's why I mentioned the issue of the exchange rate. Now, I will stop there. I've spoken long enough, and I think I must have exhausted 10 out of those 15 minutes that I was told that I can have. If it is appropriate, I will request anybody who has a question to put up his or her hand. After the session completely? Okay. Then on that happy note, I'll sit down, and I notice some tea has come for me and start having my tea. Thank you so much for your attention.
Now, I invite our second panelist, Dr. Arpita Mukherjee ma'am, to take over the stage. Ma'am, please.
And thank you very much for inviting me, and also to co-share the platform with Jalmini, who is kind of my old colleague and sometimes a guide towards this strategic part of the research that we don't really understand that well. Basically what he did is he was setting the stage of, from history to how things have happened till date. I will go backward. I will follow where we are now. Okay, so where you stand now is a time when you are hearing about something called a COVID-19 pandemic. Basically, I think in my time, this was the first time that you see countries going into lockdown, countries talking about value chains. I think this is a good time for policymakers, like the best time that they have to handle situations at home. They have to handle situations abroad. So what you saw over the last 2 decades, and which, because you are a group which will be going to give your IS and IFS exams, so what you saw over the last 3-4 years is that IMF and all the other international agencies were unable to predict the growth slowdown and the growth recovery, because most countries have also taken a kind of V-shaped recovery. Further, post-COVID, nobody predicted the Russian-Ukraine war, which also talked about suddenly your supplies of critical minerals, materials, raw materials can go off the curve. So what is today's geopolitical situations and the next 3 years? Growth prediction is dicey. Still, IMF predicts that countries like India will be growing at around 6%, above 6%, which is higher than the global average of 3% to 4%. APEC as a region is doing well, so the eastern part of us are doing well. They have around 4%, which is higher than global average. The countries which are our key export markets, like the US and the European Union, they are not doing so well. But nobody really thought that America would not be doing so well in its technology field, and you will be reading on every day how bad it is doing. While there is a tendency to have regional cooperation and global partnerships, these partnerships are now between more like-minded players. What used to rule the world, something like critical minerals and oil, today digitalization, data, governance, etc., has also become tools that is ruling the global trade. So that entire concept of trade and development and resilient supply chains have changed. And you can now see that India is, focusing on signing trade agreements on labor standards, environmental standards, on issues like critical mineral resilient supply chain, which probably 10 years ago we would have said no to such agreements. So these are going to be part of the trade. So trade is no longer exports of goods, exports of services, or bilateral investment flow. Investment in itself is changing. The type of investment that you are getting, you have to be very worried and concerned about the investment. You are now looking at which country is investing in which sector. Should I actually allow a country to kind and invest? And you may have seen how with the COVID-19, India for the first time put a ban on investment from neighboring countries with a focus on China. The impact of a country investing on any other country in terms of geostrategic, like the investment in BRIs, the inabilities of country like Sri Lanka to actually fulfill the conditions, the fear of being lost by one country or the other. That's always you are in a geopolitically difficult situation, and in building a resilient supply chain in this geopolitical situation requires a lot of time and effort, and it is a subject now no longer where the IS and the IFS can sit in two different rooms. They have to now be in the same room. A long time ago, many countries actually had decided that, the commerce should be under MEA. So the commerce should be under the external affairs, or external affairs should be with commerce, is now the kind of collaborative model that world is thinking about. And India is no exception, because we are also, if you see the entire G20 was driven by the MEA, Amitabh Kant sitting there rather than either in the finance ministry for which G20 was created or in the commerce ministry. So that was kind of a interesting twist that India brought into the G20 for the first time, because the driver was not the finance ministry. So now looking at in this world, where do we stand? Yeah, growth rate looks good. We are trying to be part of the global value chains, as J.�ᵉ𝗍 pointed out, and as we also had a lot of chat with many of you during the time that I was here. And it is true that India kind of is an outlier in this region, because we had agriculture, we still have a very big workforce in agriculture, and from there to services. We have been trying to build manufacturing, from the national manufacturing policy to Make in India to PIL. Still we are not there. Basically, if you compare our exports of manufacturing to something like Vietnam, which is a much smaller countries, they seem to be doing much better, or any other ASEAN countries. So, of course, there is a need to have a more balanced approach towards the growth of agriculture, manufacturing and services. Whether how much we haven't really been able to be more successful in that, but there is a need. But having said that, when you look at a situation like this, which is like you are in an age of technology, fourth tier technology is taking over, you have the world's largest population. India has overseeded China. Now, is this population a burden, or is this population your instrument of growth? That will depend on how you are able to make your population educated and skilled. Because today, the point that J.�ᵉ𝗍 really rightly pointed out is, it is not about labor, it is not about employment, it is about decent work. When you are talking about labor standards and decent work. And in that, if you look at our country, 80% of the employment are in contractual jobs. So, creating quality jobs, it is not about creating jobs. I emphasize creating quality jobs is a need of an hour for a country like India, where the population is taking every time. healthy population. If you look at UN SDGs, because one of the things you are talking about inclusive economy and UN SDGs, you remove poverty by a series of actions and schemes, and sometimes you target very low hanging fruit, like creating employment for certain number of years to handle the issue of poverty, or giving social security. It is not always possible for a country like this size to provide and address a poverty issue through doles. Doles can be done to certain extent because they also go into a government budget, fiscal budget deficit. So what you need to do is to create a framework and certain policy regimes which we have in place but needs to be implemented better, like education, access to education, access to basic health care and needs, access to water and sanitation. So these accesses will determine how much you are compliant with your SDGs. And if you read the G20 declaration, it says that with a country of various shapes and sizes, like hardly 20% of the SDGs are being met. With 2030 ticking, if you are talking about inclusive growth and bringing yourself into a global platform, the focus should be really on the 17 SDGs, which cover almost everything on the sun. So basically, you cannot shift your focus from marine life to anything else. As we sit today and discuss, India's WTO negotiations are happening. And what you see in the negotiations, you will get varied articles on the negotiations in the newspaper. You will hear in many cases that India is almost like a developing country role, trying to talk about the how developing countries should be supported by the WTO, how things are going to happen. But WTO in itself, while it was created with a very good idea of having a platform of voice for developed and developing countries, it's almost itself in a limbo, with the Americans not allowing the judges to handle the most important mechanism, which is the dispute settlement. Sometimes you need to think, because you are going into policy, you will be having different type of things to think through. Sometimes you need to think, where does our interest lie? Sometimes the WTO negotiations are very politically driven, but kind of quite de-linked with the economic realities of life. And what is the economic reality of life? As 𝗬𝗵𝗎 pointed out, that our share in the global export of goods is less than 2%. Like, if we want to become a bigger player, that is where the need is to be focused on. But why is it so low? To export, you need to import also. For a long time, our vision was that we will keep the import blocked by high import duties. We will allow exports, and that will enable domestic investment also. That's kind of quite a outlier thought process in a modern world. It has succeeded. The case of automobile in India is a big success story of keeping a ban of 100 and 150% on the cars. But you will not be able to replicate that story for the sector like electronics, because here, if you look at a value chain of a company, it is like each country's share is 2 to 3%. So that in an integrated global value chain concept, the biggest thing that needs to be done is to facilitate that value chain to move smoothly. And if that facilitation measure is not done, then probably making yourself bigger and better part of the global value chain will be again a dream for the next 5 years. Because while we may be exporting more, other countries are also exporting more. So the share, that global trade is rising. So your share continues to be below that 2%. I also try to think about, let's have some debate, and I kind of slide line from 𝗬𝗵𝗲 to say that what are we actually exporting in services? We are exporting IT, ITES, and we are exporting business services. These are the only two services that we are exporting. While we are among the top 10 service exporters, China is much ahead of us. So, and the bigger problem is, which I would like you guys to think through, why are we not exporting the other services? What about tourism? What about healthcare? We hear a lot about them, but why are we not among the global players? And that is where the quality and the standards and the consistency come into the picture. And this is also true for goods trade. The entire goods trade market is getting opened up by the tariff liberalizations under the trade agreement. And when there is a tariff liberalization under the trade agreement, if you give less, you will get less. So if you look at India's trade agreements and what we have achieved over the years, you will see we got less from all the trading partners with whom we have signed agreement. Lesser than any other countries, be it China, be it the ASEAN among themselves. So if you give less, you get less. So trade negotiation, as you become a trade negotiator, while it is a good sellable product that we gave less and we signed a trade agreement and came back, the reality of the gains of the trade agreement is very low. On the other hand, because India is a high tariff country, you have to give more on tariff. So whenever you see a trade agreement and post that trade agreement, you will see that our imports are rising. And when you see our imports are rising, you will come back and say trade agreement is not beneficial. But that's kind of a wrong way of looking into it, because import may be rising because we may be importing more intermediaries, we may be part of the value chain. To develop yourself a part of the value chain takes 5-7 years to actually progress. So what you are importing is more important than import rising. And that is something that you need to think about as you study. So as policies, as you design policies, what do you need to look into? One is, what are the transformation and path breaking policy? I would call 1991 reform a transformation and path breaking policy. I would call GST another transformation and path breaking policy. I would not call the 3 agricultural reforms, which were transformation and path breaking policies in itself, transformation and path breaking, because they were not following the federal structure of the India, where there is requirement for significant consultation with the state for addressing the issue which is under a state agenda. So you have to do a consultation and a state buy-in to address a issue if you want to hold it at the national level. The same problem happened with the 4 occupational code of the labor laws, which are ILO compliant and probably the excellent reform. So if an excellent reform is initiated in a federal structure without consultation and appropriate building of awareness, positivity towards that reform can come into a hold, as you can see with the 4 labor codes. So that is one part of how reforms are addressed in a country like India. Of course, there are certain benefits of the GST because it has got a single tax system, it is collecting the tax, but GST is still a thing which has to be in operation. We were studying the GST very carefully and we found that the GST is not linked to the SDGs. For example, drinking water has a GST of 18% and 12%. If your SDG goal is to provide a safe drinking water, then GST should have been lower for the drinking water. It should not be as the same rate as a juice. So therefore, there are issues in the current GST model. And that model needs to be, and that's why the Finance Commission is sitting, the 16th Finance Commission is sitting as we speak here. They need to look at that issue. They also need to look at the compensation package for the state, and what are the products in the compensation, because in the product in the compensation there are also products like no sugar drinks which are put at 40% tax because of the 12% compensation. So but the biggest problem of GST is probably a very simple thing which you students in your article should point it out. When states used to have their tax, they used to really give you the clarifications of where they are spending the money and where they are collecting the money. Increasingly, the central budget fails to give that. The GST doesn't give you where they are collecting the tax. And that is where the biggest problem lies, that the data collection and sharing, even between the government agencies or the government agencies to the general public like you and the students like you for research and forthcoming, is a very gray area in our country, which will require a lot of attention and a lot of hard work. And another example is services. We do not have services trade data by country, by market. So unless we have data, we are somewhere saying that this is so big and this is so huge. But what is making it huge? What is making it big is the question that we need to think about, because without data there cannot be planning and execution. So therefore there seems to be a lack of data for planning and execution, which needs to be looked into. I think I have covered most of the bullet point and some of the conclusions that I want to draw. Digitalization is going to continue, but digitalization has its own set of hiccups. You saw what happens to this Paytm, right? You saw what happens to edutech companies like Byju's. So you see that every time there is a big jump and big support, there is a big fall. So without disrupting the traditional channels, like today I was doing a study on ATM industry, and many of people told me, why ATM? Because I found that ATM branches are more in the villages and other areas in many other countries. And in our garb of doing digitalization, we are not supporting the growth of ATMs. And what is happening is poor people, they are actually having a zero balance accounts. Because they will go to the bank, they will pick up the money, they will make their account zero, and they are storing the cash in their house, even if you are doing direct benefit transfer. The reason is because we are subsidizing the online digital payment, but we are not subsidizing all means of financial inclusion, which includes ATM. So what I am trying to say is that when government comes up with a policy, the policy has to be neutral to the medium. So the policy is related to financial inclusion. Which medium you are using for financial inclusion is not relevant. All mediums are equally important. So that is what, with that I will now move on to the question answer part.
Now the floor is open for questions. I kindly request the audience to raise their hands one by one and identify yourselves while asking the questions.
Good afternoon, sir and ma'am. Thank you for the comprehensive
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for the comprehensive talk. Sir, I have a industrial potential seeing our industrial potential, that our percentage of our GDP is coming so much, so more than 50% from the services sector, and even declining in the industrial sector, even after the policies like Make in India. How do you see the industrial downfall in India, and what would be the reason which you would point for the industrial backlog? And for ma'am, I have a question, that what is your opinion on income tax rates? Like, should we go towards the European way of income tax rates, like even more than 40%, 45%, France has even 55% of income tax rates, or should we be in situation where we let the people file the income tax returns by lowering the income tax. So, what is your opinion? Thank you.
You can. A good question on industry. I think I touched upon it obliquely. Let me be more explicit now. You know that some Toyota vehicles are produced in India. Not the top end, but quite a few. I know that some European car manufacturers are trying to produce in India. I'm just using auto industry as an example. There are many other kinds of industries which can be more sophisticated. The more sophisticated the industry, the less the number of people. So if you want to move up, I think a mention was made about digitization and how the world is moving towards using IT broadly defined more so, and that's true of industry as well. Now I point you to the results of this survey called 𝗧𝗵𝗵. Now, 8th class students cannot do third standard mathematics. Now, if you are a factory worker, if you are an industry worker in any industry, it doesn't have to be a booklet in English. It can be translated to Tamil or Hindi or whatever. But the person should be basic numeracy and basic literacy. I think we are lagging behind many of our competitors. If you go to Vietnam, a mention was made of Vietnam, because the West, broadly defined, led by the US, wants to bring China down a peg or two. So there are gradually some ways by which they want to discriminate against products which come from China. To that extent, Vietnam has benefited. We could have done the same. Vietnam, I don't know whether some of you have gone there. Very few people speak English. They're all speaking in Vietnamese to each other, and then you need an interpreter to talk to whoever you want to talk to. In absolute numbers, not as a percentage of the population, we have far more people who can understand and manage in English, which is by and large, whether we like it or not, an international language. But our workforce is so poor in their ability to even understand an instruction manual. So if you want to be a shop floor worker, you have to understand not just hygiene, that we'll understand, but how a machine works and what are the precautions to be taken. Because you need people, and you'll notice that you can even see within India, the geographical dispersion. If you look at the Japanese automakers, they are all essentially in the south. And then you look at numeracy and literacy, they are better numbers in the south. So that's my sort of overarching answer to your question, but it will not answer the question if you get into specifics. But this is not the time and place to get into A, B, C industry and why we are not being competitive. By and large, it is primary education. Basic numeracy, basic literacy, some understanding so that a foreign investor, or for that matter a domestic investor, would like to invest in a large industrial some factory, anything else, in which 1,000 workers, 2,000 workers, and to that extent the number of people who get employed in industry grows. It is just not happening. I feel there is also the issue of land, but I think that can be overcome. It's basically the quality of our workforce.
So to answer your question, there is a corporate income tax and there is a personal income tax. So you are talking about the personal or the corporate. So in case of the personal income tax, I have a question for you. How many people in India do pay tax?
7%.
So your priority is not to push that 7%. Your priority is to make that 7% 30%. Okay. So if you have to make that 7% 30%, you put in a higher tax, you further create an incentive not to pay the tax. Secondly, if you are comparing India with France, suppose if I lose job, I will get a total security. Are you giving it to me? No. So therefore the point is like this, that the logic should be how we can expand our tax base, create quality employment so that we get the bigger tax. So that's from a public finance point of view, that's what you need to look into.
Sir, thank you so much for this enlightening discussion. I have a question for both of you. As we know that semiconductors are growing in importance in the future world economic order. So even Chris Miller pointed out in his book Chip War that they are identical to oil in the future economic order. So how India is, I want to know your views on how India is strategizing to grow its semiconductor industry.
So basically in the case of semiconductor, you rightly pointed out that it is a electronics, I am going a little this thing, setting up the resilient semiconductor supply chain is a core objective of the global trade regime now. India also wants to be a key player in the entire process. Like, you know, semiconductor is not only about China and US. There are, it's a big farm is in Malaysia. You may have seen the one that got burned down and stuff like that, and how the entire supply chain got disrupted. So, but there are certain things we need to look into. One is that the government of India has been giving a PLI scheme for the, and all the other initiatives the government has taken for the manufacturing of the semiconductor. But if you look at this PLI scheme, which is a scheme related to production of a certain item, and in the WTO context, it will be a WTO actionable subsidy. So if you export a certain amount which is beyond a limit, you can face countervailing duties in other countries. So there is a bit of a problem. But if you now manufacture for the domestic market using a semiconductor thing, it is definitely the scheme is going to benefit. So there are schemes, policies that is being tried out. But if you are setting a semiconductor manufacturing facility in India, you need a lot of other things to be in place, like 24/7 good quality uninterrupted power supply. So you need to create an infrastructure for that production, and that a lot of this infrastructure is actually in the hand of the states as well, not only in the hand of the central government. So yes, there is a need for the semiconductor. Yes, India wants to be a key player in that, and we have already started on that work. But there is a need to do a lot more things in terms of policies and in terms of supply of the infrastructure and other things that is needed by this industry to grow and move faster. Over to you.
I'm glad you read the book called Chip Wars, and you would remember that Taiwan took the lead, and the US fell behind for a number of reasons, including state support for the companies which were producing chips. And you must have heard of this company, I don't know how, because it's an acronym, NVIDIA, which is whose share value has more than doubled in less than a month. So yes, this is a technology which is here and for the future. Having said that, which is the car that we produce in India which is totally indigenous? Would you say Maruti? But it's owned partly by, not partly, now majority owned by Suzuki. We have a situation where we produce practically no heavy machinery or anything. I think Baba Kalyani has got this company called Bharat Forge, and we keep talking about it, but he produces spare parts. He doesn't produce a full machine. So we have to ask ourselves this question: are we incompetent? But same Indians go abroad and become head of Microsoft, become head of Google. I mean, not head in the sense that the Erin Page or whatever his name was, still they head the company. We seem to do very well outside. and we don't necessarily do as well inside the country. But at the same time, if you go to the Defense Research and Development Organization, you might remember the ISRO achievement on landing a spacecraft on the moon. You would know that Department of Atomic Energy has its experts when it comes to nuclear energy. But by and large, except for limited fields where there is security and national defense involved, we don't seem to do so well. My guess is that we don't respect specialization, we don't respect true excellence. There is far too much, and now I'm going to say something very controversial, so you'll bear with me, that there is far too much, within inverted commas, talk of reservation. So at some point you have to say, those who are excellent will have to be paid excellent salaries. Give them $10,000 a month. I mean, if they produce something like what Taiwan has done, give them $20,000 a month. One has to value those people. You have to respect them. You have to publicly honor them. We do have the 𝗵𝗵𝗃𝗵𝗃 awards for mathematics and so on, and for sciences. We need to do more of that. I'm not saying that we are doing nothing, but we have to honor people in lines of technology and science much, much more than what we have done till now. There is a dumbing down to the average in our country, saying that otherwise it will become elitism. Science and technology and esoteric areas like chip manufacture are going to be led by people who are exceptional, and they'll have to be rewarded exceptionally. We don't have to reward them as much as Elon Musk, who's a bit of an egomaniac. But we do have to honor, and our political leadership does honor them outside, but we need to promote more of that. That is my broad answer to your question. There is no reason why we can't do it. It has all kinds of requirements. I don't know whether you know. Funnily, chip manufacture requires a lot of water. You'll say, why water? We are not going to get into it. And you need water of a purity which is exceptional. So there will be all kinds of things like that where we don't have the environment to... environment here, I'm not referring to the environment in terms of air quality. You've seen, that's also a technical thing. I'm glad I mentioned air quality. All of us suffer during certain times of the thing, and we keep hearing about stubble burning. Stubble burning stopped a long time ago. We are not, again I'm going to go to a very controversial word, HONEST. We are not at times sufficiently honest about things about ourselves. Moment you are honest, it's like children appearing to study with a comic book in between the textbook, and the parent looks into the room and says, bahut padh raha hai bachcha. But he's not reading anything, he's reading a comic. So let us not fool ourselves, and let us reward excellence. And I'm quite sure not just chips, in some other areas too we'll do very well. Because this is an area which does not require huge amounts of space. It doesn't require 100 acres or something like that. You can have chip manufacturing in smaller units, and we can leapfrog. Particularly because, and I'm now putting on my foreign service hat, because the US wants to contain China, we will get some help from the US, but up to a point. When they feel we are getting too big for our boots, they will support Pakistan to try and keep us down. But taking that into account, we should be able to do something, a combination of foreign policy, strategic thought, supporting excellence. We may, in the next 10 years, it's not going to happen overnight. It will take you at least 10 years.
Now we are going to take the last question.
Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, ma'am. So, sir, I have a question regarding this climate-related issue with economy. So, sir, the rapid transition from fossil fuels to the green energy, how it is going to affect the semi-skilled and unskilled employment of India, the sector of semi-skilled and unskilled employment in India, and how India is going to tackle it?
Who is the question addressed to?
Sir, both of you.
From a fossil fuel to, so basically you are talking about the mining part, semi-skilled and unskilled. Any which way, see, the mining part, there is globally a lot of restrictions that is coming about on the mining part in terms of the labor health standards and stuff like that. Like, you know, globally also there is a lot of issues that are coming up, and India also is coming. India has specific mining regulations which are more or less ILO compliant, but the regulations are going to be stringier and stronger as we actually go in for trade agreements and things like that. So even in mining, it is going for environmental safety and occupational health and safety conditions have to be taken into account. So in terms of the labor, it is going to be it's not like they will all be unemployed. It is in cases they will be more protected than being if you look at the mining conditions, it is sometimes that, you know, countries will be held responsible if you sign, because ILO are ratified conditions. If you don't follow, nobody penalizes you. But now if you are signing a trade agreement with a country like European Union and there are scientific reasons to prove that you have flouted the requirement, you can be even penalized. So in terms of their working condition, it can actually improve. So we don't know how the EU new law will be shaping up in 2025, but if that law is a mandate, then health will improve. Now the problem is not related, but we are relating it to climate and labor. The issue is actually labor standards. You know, although the environment and labor are covered under the same chapter, these are two different issues. The issue is on the labor standard. The climate is a very different kind of a ball game altogether, because climate changes is impacting agricultural production, it is impacting food and safety, it is impacting production techniques, you know, where you produce, how you produce, and that has a lot of implications in the global trade and how the trades are monitored. And countries are now monitoring trade through use of technology, because they are actually collecting a lot of data and they are putting the countries in those kind of zones. For example, India may be in a high risk zone of aflatoxin contamination for peanuts, or for example for turmeric. We are trying to develop as a turmeric. So then what happens is, if I am put in that zone, then they use the climate condition related issues to monitor and put a more risk management on me. So that is the issue.
Well, I will tell you an anecdote. When I was in India, I was your representative to the European Union, among other responsibilities. The Director General for Environment in the European Union was giving me a hard time. We were just chatting in his office, telling me about, India is producing these many tons of carbon dioxide and we are polluting the atmosphere, etc., etc. He went on and I let him speak for some time. Then I said, okay, now my turn to speak. I said, what is our population? So he knew the number. We are talking some time back. So we were somewhere around 1.2, 1.3 billion. So I said, what do they inhale? He looked at me, what do they inhale? I said, they inhale oxygen. What do they exhale? They exhale carbon dioxide. So what do you want us to do? Should we stop breathing? You all laughed. He didn't laugh. His face started getting red. Then I said, what about bathing? What do you people do? You got overhead showers and you stand under the shower for 10 minutes. And God knows how many buckets of water is gone. Shouldn't every Indian individual have at least one bucket of water for the full day? So obviously he must have. Then my staff officer Arvind Jindal, who's today Additional Secretary in the Ministry of Petroleum, he turns to me in the car as we are going back. He says, "Sir, do you really want to send this back to Delhi?" I said, "Of course." And underline where I've said, should Indians stop breathing? So this is just a light-hearted way of pointing out that pollution levels have to be measured in per capita terms. The Western countries, including the EU, if I was there, I would have hammered them on this talk about imposing certain duties on our exports on the grounds that we don't meet certain environmental standards. I would have showed to them that whether it is Germany, which is up there in terms of their green movement, influencing their government to even shut down nuclear power plants. They're absolute idiots, I would say, because nuclear power, I'm sorry if you disagree with me, it is one of the cleanest forms of energy, and you can keep your used fuel 500 meters below the ground for the next 10,000 years. After that, it doesn't really matter. 10,000 years is a long time. But coming back to your point about what should we do, we should do it for our own good. In the sense that, and what did we do when we were children in school? We were told, we were taken in buses and we planted plants. I don't know whether those plants survived because, cows come and they eat up the plants. When we were in college, we planted some plants. When I was in service initially, we had to go out, village darshan, as if, it's something, we are giving them a darshan. The villagers are very bored when they see us, but we go there and plant something. I would submit to all of you, if all of you can be involved in planting one plant, and then see some care for the next year or so, you've done enough for. Don't worry about the international repercussions. That Government of India will take care of. And all of us need to be cognizant about being honest about it. That if we can, I think one of the biggest polluters in Delhi, I'm trying to kind of drill it, she's already spoken at the international level, drill it down at our personal level. One constituent of pollution in Delhi, and must be true of all large cities, is the two-wheeler. But the two-wheelers are owned by people who have lower income than those who have cars. So you can't tell them stop driving two-wheeler, but you can move it towards battery. But a battery-operated scooter costs about 1,40,000. A petrol one you can get for 65,000. Somebody has to bear the cost. I'm happy to bear the cost as a taxpayer. I want government to say, you taxpayers, of course it's a very low number, as was being pointed out. We want, I think direct taxes is about 6% of GDP, indirect taxes about 5%. You look at Germany, you look at US, they are somewhere in their high 20s. So we don't pay taxes, so we need to encourage people, आप भी थोड़ा दे दीजिए, अगले जन्म में आप चूहा नहीं बनेंगे, so you should be mindful of all that. So that's where there is some governmental action where we should then willingly not have demonstrations saying, "Arey, aapne tax बढ़ा दिया इसका." People who have two-wheelers, let them transition to battery-operated two-wheelers. And those who have got cycles, they should aspire to have battery-operated scooter. Not this business of minimalist. I'm a great admirer of Mahatma Gandhi, but I'm not entirely sure that everybody can follow his example of just one loincloth and one pair of khada. It is not possible. We are all, I am a very average person in what I want and do not want. I could never live a life of Mahatma Gandhi. You cannot expect the entire population of India to be like that. So, therefore, there will be some environmental damage, but the US is the highest, and Europe is not far behind in per capita terms, in terms of pollution. So, in a public government level, and also whether you're writing in a newspaper or an article for your college magazine, keep harping on pollution, environmental degradation on a per capita basis. We are way, way, way down. So, we have still to develop And so, therefore, you refer to fossil fuels for some time to come. We have among, if not the highest, the second highest reserves of coal. Let's figure out some way of gasification of coal. And let us figure out some ways by which coal can be used which is less polluting. But we can't do away with coal in the next, I feel, at least 20 years, maybe 30. And similarly for oil. If we can somehow extract hydrogen from the earth, I believe the latest studies are indicating that there are huge reserves of hydrogen underneath us. If we can get that, that is the best of every world, because you burn hydrogen, you get water. So, aapka water problem bhi solve ho gaya. So, I mean, those are miracles which happen due to science and technology. If that happens, nothing like it. Thank you.
My question is to 𝗵𝗵𝗃 sir. Sir, as you in the Promise of India, you have highlighted that for Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, that long-lasting achievements, yet Prime Minister in name. I have not read the entire book, but in the initial precepts, I found that. Bimal Jalan sir wrote a book, Indian Economy, Prospects and Challenges, in which he has highlighted that future generations will be more grateful to Manmohan Singh sir for the things that he has done for India. Not by not politicizing the question while being in the economic domain. Both Mr. Modi and Mr. Singh, while in their time and spaces, they have done great things, and both of them are legends. And I am too small a fish to analyze both of them. But while being in the economic domain, if we analyze the economic approach of Mr. Singh and Mr. Modi, what is the basic difference between the economic approach of both the two legend prime minister? So I want to hear from you.
Sure. Let's first begin with Dr. Manmohan Singh. He did his doctorate from the UK, as you know, and he's been honored by, I don't know, forget which one, the Oxford University or Cambridge University. One of them has honored him by setting up a fellowship in his name. You have quoted me to say that I called him a prime minister in name and not in, he's a de jure prime minister, not a de facto prime minister, and I think it's an open secret. I don't think I'm giving you any new information that Madam Sonia Gandhi, as Congress President, was running the show. Now, this is something that our framers of Constitution should have thought of and said that nobody can be Prime Minister if they have not won a Lok Sabha election. So, that's one important difference between Mr. Narendra Modi and Dr. Manmohan Singh, is that Narendra Modi has repeatedly won Lok Sabha elections and then state assembly elections. Whether we like him, we don't like him, we think he is very bright, whether we think that he is very efficient is another matter. But he has come through the electoral route. So I think this is a cop-out. And then as far as his Rajya Sabha membership is concerned, since I am from Assam, and Dr. Manmohan Singh came to Rajya Sabha from Assam, the then Chief Minister, I'm not letting out any state secrets, it's all there in Assamese newspapers and for that matter perhaps some English newspapers as well, that the then Chief Minister, Mr. 𝗧𝗵𝗃 𝗧𝗵𝗃, under the Constitution, a Rajya Sabha member had to be ordinarily resident in the state from where he is elected. That was the Constitution at that point of time. So Dr. Manmohan Singh showed residence. Which residence? He is supposed to have rented some house which belonged to the Chief Minister's wife. This is the level of intellectual degradation which I don't think one would expect from a person who's done a PhD in economics. You cannot have it. So these are some of the reasons why I felt that he was a good finance minister, and I would give, if you look at my chapter on Narasimha Rao, I will give him 95% of the credit because he is taking the political flak. In a house of 543 members, he had 220. And yet he managed to be there from 91 to 96. He did lots of reforms till 93, then he realized the coalition will break up if he does any more. Do you know who was the industry minister in 1991? You wouldn't know, you're probably not born. So in 1991, Narasimha Rao was the industry minister, along with being the prime minister. In de facto terms, not in de jure terms. In de jure terms, there was somebody else as the industry minister. The even more important reform for me, there's no such thing like more important, the exchange rate devaluation was very important, was delicensing of industry. Till then, we used to have, thanks to Mrs. Indira Gandhi, who knew nothing about economics, and they had licensing. You can only produce 1,000 units of whatever it is, scooters or this. If you produce more, which is good for the economy, then you'll be penalized. You'll get into trouble with the law. So that kind of nonsense was done away with. And he was good because he's doing what he is familiar with, which is economics. Although I.G. Patel, you'll notice from my chapter on Dr. Manmohan Singh that I'm not a great fan of his. Dr. I.G. Patel, I quote him, and he writes in the Economic and Political Weekly, which as you know is widely read. He said that Dr. Manmohan Singh is a very, very underrated politician and a very, very, very overrated economist. So this was a very, very, should I say, hitting well below the belt kind of a blow from I.G. Patel on Dr. Manmohan Singh. Now, what was the rest of your question? Have I answered your question fully?
Difference between the economic
approach of the current Prime Minister. The current Prime Minister is not an economist. So he is what I would call, he is on the job 22 hours of the day. I don't know when he sleeps because he's either abroad or he's inaugurating something. You have to give him full marks for energy. I think infrastructure in terms of roads have done well thanks to Mr. Gadkari and his being able to get the National Highway Authority of India to work well. All this is very good. But the approach of Dr. Manmohan Singh on the economy side is to always try to take people along with him. In this room, I'm sure there are many. Who are the people for whom Hindi is not their mother tongue? Are there anybody here? Not as many as I thought there would be, but there are still some. That's perhaps because we are in Delhi. If we go to some other place, there will be many for whom Hindi is not their mother tongue. One needs to be careful. You need to carry people. So whether it is politics or whether it's the economy, you need to carry people. And I disagree with the kind of agitation that happened some time back, these farmers, those 3 farm laws. I thought 2 were good, 1 was not so good. But if you had that discussion with them before, it can't be my way or the highway. So there is a bit of a danger because we are a very, very diverse country. Sabko leke chalo. Ekla chalo re, Mahatma Gandhi quoting Tagore was a different thing. Meaning, if I am on my true and right path, then if nobody follows me, I've got a Bengali lady here, she can probably recite the whole poem by heart. Ekla chalo re. But that is a different thing. Otherwise, in politics, ekla na chalo re. Take
I, on behalf of the whole team of Kartavya, thank our esteemed guests for sharing their valuable insights over the topic and answering all queries patiently. We extend our heartiest gratitude to all our today's guests for not only sparing their valuable time, but also for gracing the event with their presence and for enlightening us with their commendable experience.